Well, hello xenographers everywhere and welcome to another episode. Today we're looking at 5 more vintage lenses that you can use on your digital mirrorless camera. And today's lineup is the Tokina 28 to 70mm f1.4. We've got the Vivitar 80 to 200mm f4.5. We've got the Canon FD 50mm f1.8. We've got the Pentacon 50mm f1.8 and we've got the Mirrorless 37mm f2.8. So let's begin by looking at the Canon 50mm f1.8. This was the kit lens for the Canon AE1 SLR camera, and this lens came to me on an AE1 that I recently bought. 50mm is a useful focal length. It's often known as a standard or a normal lens. It's a sort of a baseline focal length because it's said to approximately reproduce the field of vision of the human eye. So what you see through a 50mm lens is pretty much what you see when you look around at the world. I was expecting good results from this lens and I certainly got them. It's a very nice piece of glass indeed. Apertures run from f1.8 to f22, so it's a reasonably fast lens, and when you're reasonably close to your subject you can expect a nice bit of background blur. The quality of the background blur on this lens is very nice indeed. It's very soft. The focus ring is at the front of the lens and it has a nice knurled rubber grip so you can easily find it. It turns very smoothly and easily. Minimum focus distance is about 60 centimeters. In fact, that's the only real drawback I can see with this lens, if that's a drawback at all. It means that you can't get quite as close to your subject as you might with other lenses. Having said that, 60 centimeters is close enough for most photography, and I didn't find that a handicap when I was using it. The aperture ring is at the back of the lens closest to the camera body, and it has a sort of a ridged finish so that you can find it easily when you're looking through the viewfinder. Maximum aperture is f1.8 and minimum is f22, so there's a good range on this lens. I very much enjoyed using this lens, and I've made some images with this lens that I found very pleasing indeed. It's a lovely little piece of glass. It renders colours very nicely indeed, and it's very sharp. And while 50mm might not be the ideal focal length for street photography, I found this one stepped up to the role very well indeed. All in all, a very nice little lens, a joy to use, reasonably fast with its 1.8 maximum aperture, and while the minimum focus distance isn't the closest you can get in 50mm lenses, it's certainly close enough for most situations. I'd never used a Canon lens before I tried this one, and I was very pleasantly surprised. It's a very nice lens indeed. They're not particularly expensive. A good example of one of these can be found for about £40 or thereabouts. A great choice then for a vintage standard prime, and full marks to the Canon 50mm 1.8. Next up we've got the Tokina 28 to 70mm. It's a fixed aperture lens, which means that at both the short and the long ends the aperture stays the same at f4. That's fairly unusual because in most zoom lenses the aperture becomes smaller as you go towards the long end. In this one it doesn't. This lens came to me with an Olympus OM1 that I bought some time ago now, and I never really paid it too much attention. It's obviously lived a hard life, it's been well used, it's got a few scratches and dings and knocks here and there, and I didn't really think too much more about it. However, when I did try it, I was quite surprised. This is a really nice lens, although perhaps I shouldn't be surprised because Tokina is a major lens manufacturer and has produced some very nice pieces of glass over the years. This one's no exception. Colour rendition is very nice indeed on this lens. It's all metal, so it's very well constructed, very nicely made and well engineered, and because it's not too long a zoom, it's not too big. It will be no problem to mount this lens on a camera and carry it round all day. The focus ring is here at the front of the lens, and it has a very smooth and light action. There's a big rubber grip so that you can find it very easily while you're looking through the viewfinder, and it has a diamond pattern surface so it's very easy to grip. The aperture ring is here right at the back of the lens, and again it's got this ridged finish so that you can grip easily and find it easily when you're looking through the viewfinder. The zoom ring is here just in front of the aperture ring, and quite surprisingly there's no grip on it, it's just a plain metal ring. So it's rather less easy to turn than the focus ring and the aperture ring. It's easy enough to turn though. 28 is the wide end and 70 is the long end. This lens has a trick up its sleeve because, like a lot of vintage zooms, it has a macro function. Now, while many vintage zooms have the word macro marked on the barrel, sometimes when you come to try them, you can't get too close at all. In this case, the word macro is not entirely misplaced. It gets down to at least 20 centimeters, and it might even go further than that. It may be around 15. I've not actually measured it, so I couldn't say exactly. But as these images show, it really does get very close indeed. It renders colours really nicely, and it's very sharp. At the wide end it's great for street photography, and the long end gives you a little bit more reach. I've been very surprised by this lens, both by its quality of manufacture and the images it can make, and that macro function really is a bonus. If you like close-up photography, as I do, this lens is really useful. The quality of the bokeh is very pleasing indeed. It's very nice and soft, very gentle. I've enjoyed using this lens very much. It's been a real surprise to me. It makes great images, it's not too big, it has a very handy range of focal lengths, and it's very well made and engineered. This lens from Tokina then is highly recommended. The next lens in today's lineup is the Vivitar 80 to 200mm f4.5. This is another constant aperture lens, which means that as you move through the zoom range, the aperture doesn't change. Again, it's a lens that came to me in a bundle of lenses, and as I don't shoot zooms very often, I didn't really use it too much. It has a large focus ring, as many zooms do, and it has a nice diamond finish pattern so that you can grip easily, and you can find it pretty easily while you're looking through the viewfinder. And it turns very nicely throughout the focusing range with a reasonably short throw. Seems to be about 180 degrees. The aperture ring is at the back of the lens, closest to the camera body, and it's nice and easy to turn, and it has a nice smooth, damped motion. It does have click stops, however the clicks are not particularly well defined, and so this may be a lens that you could use easily on video if you want to change aperture settings during a shot. The closest focus distance on this lens is 2.5 meters, but as it's a long zoom, that doesn't really matter too much. At the 80mm wide end, it produces some very nice results. Colour rendition is very good, and the images are nice and sharp. Vivitar are a quality manufacturer. They've produced some very nice lenses over the years, and this one is testament to their quality of engineering and construction. It's very nicely made. It does lose some contrast at the long end, but my goodness, it has quite a reach. As it's such a long lens though, if you're using it at the long end for video, you will need some sort of stabilisation, either a camera with in-body stabilisation, or a gimbal, or a good sturdy tripod. Like many vintage zooms, it's a push-pull lens, so push forward to reach the 80mm focal length and pull it backwards for the 200mm length. The action is nice and easy, and on this example at least there's no appreciable wear, so the zoom ring will stay where you want it to. This lens makes some really nice images, however it does lose a bit of contrast at the long end, so if you like shots with a lot of strong contrast, this may not be the lens for you. Personally, I rather like the low contrast look, and if you need to, you can always correct that in post. I've enjoyed using this lens. It is rather large and it is rather heavy due to its all metal construction, but if you can get past that, it's a very nice lens indeed. It renders colours nicely, the background blur is nice and soft, and it's altogether a nice long zoom. Well done to the Vivitar 80 to 200mm. Next up we've got the Mir 1 lens from Russia. This lens has quite a reputation, and having used it for a while, I can say that reputation is very well deserved. It's a truly lovely lens. It dates from 1958, so it's a relatively modern lens, and as far as I'm aware it was made up to the mid-80s or thereabouts. It has a stepless aperture ring, which is a boon for shooting video. Its focal length of 37mm is a very unusual one. For all practical purposes though, you can use this as a 35mm. Maximum aperture is f2.8 and minimum is f16, so it's reasonably fast, and minimum focusing distance is 0.7 meters or 70 centimeters. That isn't particularly close, but it's close enough for most situations. The focusing ring is at the back of the lens, nearest to the camera body, and it has a very well defined grip, so you can find it very easily while you're looking through the viewfinder, while the aperture settings are right at the front of the lens. Many lenses have these positions swapped around, but personally I prefer this arrangement. It just seems more natural somehow. Like many old lenses, it's made entirely of metal, so it's very well engineered and long lasting. As for image quality, well, this lens is absolutely fantastic. Colour rendition is very nice indeed. The quality of the out of focus areas in the back of the shot is absolutely beautiful. Because this lens has a 10 blade aperture, any point light source behind the subject is pretty much circular, so the look you get, it's like bubbles. It's beautiful. It gives a wonderful effect. This lens produces absolutely unique bokeh. I don't know another lens that can quite do what this lens can. It's very, very pleasing indeed. And as well as bubbly bokeh, it will also give you, if you get the distances right, a little bit of swirl, which isn't everybody's cup of tea, but I do find it very pleasing. I do like a little bit of swirl. It will also give you some lens flare of a particularly pleasing type. It's a little bit like the effect of a cine lens that you sometimes see in 70s feature films. It's kind of orangey red in colour, and while sometimes seen as a defect, I really like a bit of flare, and this lens will give you as much as you want. This lens is one of my personal favourites. It's small and relatively light for an all-metal lens. It has a wide field of view. It's very well made, and the images it makes are absolutely knockout. They really are that good. These lenses sell for around about £70 to £100 or thereabouts. You might find them cheaper, you might find them more expensive, but that's a rough sort of guide. So it's not the cheapest lens of this group, but it's not particularly expensive either. Buy one of these and you won't be disappointed. Next up we've got the Pentacon 50mm f1.8 to f16. This is a lens that was made in the millions, and as far as value for money goes, this lens might be the pick of the bunch. It's an all-metal lens, and it's very well engineered and put together. Minimum focus distance is about 30 centimeters. The focus ring is at the front of the lens, and it has a relatively short throw. The aperture ring is at the back, and this lens does have click stops on its aperture. You can buy one of these today for around about £20, or perhaps even less, so it's a very good value lens indeed. The quality of the images it makes is absolutely stunning. It renders colours very nicely indeed. It's quite a sharp lens, and the quality of the background blur is very, very nice indeed. One of the nicest I've seen, in fact. It's very soft, very gentle, very smooth. There's no busyness or fussiness about it. It's just lovely. Like a lot of photographic equipment from the former Eastern Bloc countries, this lens is often considered not quite as capable as its Western counterparts. However, I've not found that to be true at all. I've made some very nice images with this lens. It's a really nice piece of kit. It's small, it's light, it's well made. As far as the mount goes, some were made with an M42 mount, others were made with the Praktica bayonet mount. And I would advise, if you're going to get one of these, get one with an M42 mount, and you'll find an adapter very easily. Adapters for the Praktica mount are not quite as common. Bokeh from point light sources is very pleasing indeed. It's not quite circular, but it's near enough to circular to give a really nice feel to an image. The lens was made for many years, from as far as I know the 1950s right up until the late 80s, or possibly later, so there are many of these about. They're very easy to find, and they're very cheap to buy. These lenses will sell for around about £20 for a good one, and you may find them even cheaper than that. If you're looking for a 50mm lens and you don't want to lay out too much money, this is ideal. All in all, a very nice piece of kit at a very affordable price. Top marks then to the Pentacon 50mm f1.8. So there we are, 5 very nice vintage lenses that will give you some fantastic images that you can buy today and use on your digital mirrorless camera. They're all affordable, some more affordable than others, but all will give you great value. I do hope you've enjoyed this episode. I hope it's been of some use, and I will see you next time for more Zenography. Thanks for watching.